There's a whole lot of variety to what falls under the umbrella of mecha anime. You've got realistic war dramas, high fantasy adventures, detective serials, monster of the week smash 'em ups, tits and ass fan service bait, and a whole lot else besides. It turns out there's a lot that can be done with the basic concept of big robots who fight. But discussing what makes these anime similar, and what makes them different, is made more challenging by the terminology we tend to use. Anytime you have a media genre with a lot of variation within it, fans and creators will attempt to come up with subgenres to further break it up. Humans love taxonomy, especially when it comes to things that don't really matter. But placing stuff into buckets makes it easier to talk about how a genre evolves, outline how things relate to each other, more easily make and receive recommendations, and in general, help one avoid things that we may dislike. For mecha, there are really only two such buckets: super robots and real robots. Both terms are highly nebulous, which has a lot to do with why I'm making this video in the first place. I'm going to do my best to describe them in the terms most commonly used. Super Robot series are mecha series with more fantastical settings and rules. Super Robot series typically aren't grounded, with a greater focus on the fate of humanity at large and the fight against evil. Super robots are typically super weapons, one-off creations with arcane origins, the mechanical rendition of the superhero origin and power set, really. The prototypical Super Robot series is Mazinger Z. In Mazinger Z, the eponymous Mazinger is a superpowered robot created by a single elderly scientist for his grandson. He uses it to fight ancient robotic monsters, commanded by an evil scientist and his very bizarre underlings. There's nothing particularly grounded or realistic about Mazinger Z. It's a fantastical machine used in a superhero power fantasy of good versus evil. Real Robot series, on the other hand, are mecha series with more scientific settings and rules. Real Robot series are typically more grounded, with a greater focus on individual drama and the war between competing factions. Real robots are typically weapons of war, often mass-produced, the human-shaped equivalent of a tank or fighter jet. The prototypical Real Robot series is, of course, Mobile Suit Gundam. In Mobile Suit Gundam, the eponymous Gundam is a prototype machine created by scientists, ultimately for mass production. It's used to fight against an enemy army with their own equivalent machines of war, with great focus put on the senselessness of the conflict, as well as the good people on both sides. The Gundam is a relatively more grounded machine. While its science is very hand-wavy, the series goes out of its way to make it clear that it's just a weapon like any other, though a particularly effective one. These holotypes are particularly stark in their example, and they're fairly easy to distinguish. Super robots are more fantasy, real robots are more hard science. Getter Robo is super robot, Macross is real robot, Gurren-Lagann, super, VOTOMs, real. And it's not all about tone either. The Big O plays itself extremely straight, but it's undoubtedly a super robot series. Xabungle is extremely goofy, but it without question features real robots. But here's the problem. As with all subgenre definitions, there's a lot of stuff that falls somewhere between the two, making the whole distinction rather challenging. Let me pose to you a few complicated cases, and I'll let you be the judge. Is Space Runaway Ideon a super robot series? The Ideon spends most of the series fighting with largely conventional weaponry against alien aggressors that, it turns out, are basically just rather mean space humans. And the conflict is played out in very gritty details, not that different from the original Gundam. Not that surprising, given that it's the thing that Gundam creator Yoshiyuki Tomino created next. At the same time, the Ideon's origins are very much inexplicable and mystical. Its power set eventually becomes cosmic in scale, and the individual drama and war between humanity and the Buff Clan are eventually superseded by the existential angst of judgmental gods. It's grim and dark, and it's certainly not power fantasy, but it's a story one would be really hard-pressed to associate with hard science fiction. Is Aura Battler Dunbine a super robot series? The setting of Dunbine is very much high fantasy, with dragons and knights abound. The Aura Battlers are mystically powered machines. but they're also manufactured weapons and treated not all that different from Gundam's mobile suits. The core conflict is a civil war, not some end-all be-all fight against evil. While there's interdimensional hopping between the mundane world and the high fantasy world, Upper Earth is played very straight. Is the concept of humans possessing mystical auras really that much more fantastical than the space psychics of the original Gundam? Does the fact that Dunbine is another Tomino series matter at all? What about the fairies?
I must somehow make sense of our convoluted situation.
Is Aim for the Top Gunbuster a super robot series? The Gunbuster is a giant super machine piloted by a couple of teens, fighting space monsters that want to kill humanity. The weapons it uses are incredibly fantastical and over the top, and there's a whole heap and helping of yelling attack names while killing millions of aliens at once. The technology involved certainly isn't grounded. At the same time, the series as a whole has a pretense of outdated, incorrect science. The Gunbuster is mass-produced into the Sizzlers, and by and large, the conflict is treated with a reverence much more in line with hard sci-fi than fantasy. The core power fantasy at its heart certainly makes it feel like a super robot series. The vastly inferior sequel Diebuster even throws away that scientific pretense to go full-on no-question super robot. Does that have any bearing on Gunbuster itself? Is Neon Genesis Evangelion a super robot series? The Evas are giant space alien human progenitor cousin clones with cockpits stuck in them, used to fight alien human progenitor cousin clones that project absolute terror fields that protect them from damage. It's a fight for humanity's survival against an uncaring enemy that wants to drive us to extinction, framed in a very super robot-esque monster of the week structure. The conflict eventually veers into being man against man, but there's a lot of stuff involving ancient alien souls, Judeo-Christian religious imagery, and humanity evolving into a singularity soup going on at the same time. The Evas are immensely tall, unrealistic things, but they wield largely conventional weapons, except for when they don't, and are treated in a grounded, serious fashion, except for when they aren't. The drama is played very straight, and the series never dalliances with power fantasy, that's to be sure. But, on the other hand, there's a hyper-intelligent penguin living in Shinji's apartment. So, you know. Gundam in particular is interesting in that, depending how you look at the individual series that make up the franchise, it frequently straddles the super robot line or outright jumps over it. Mobile Fighter G Gundam, with its robot kung fu, hot-blooded shonen adventures, and menacing evil robot baddie, is obviously a super robot series, even if the society at large around them is played relatively straight. Is Gundam 00, with its many bespoke super machines, very nebulously scientifically justified psychic integrated super attacks, an eventual movie headline alien invasion, a super robot series? Maybe? Probably not? Does the fact that the Psycho Frame can apparently reverse time make Gundam Unicorn a super robot series, even as everything else in it is played to maximum real robot grittiness? I have no idea. I guess where I'm going with this is that the bucket metaphor is kind of daft, when really, genres are more of a spectrum, and ultimately, the genre something belongs to says very little about the quality of the work in it. The vast majority of super robot shows are hot garbage. The same is true for real robot series. The same is true for all anime. As someone who has greatly enjoyed both real robot and super robot series in his time, it's always amusing to me to hear people speak extremely strongly about one over the other. The fact that people will say that they love real robot series and hate super robot series, while also praising Evangelion, a series that at the very least draws an awful lot from super robot series of old, not to mention Ultraman, says a lot about how people value aesthetic purity and thematic grittiness over actual realism, or vice versa, which is fine, nothing wrong with that. And ultimately, I get why the terminology exists. There's something to the fact that, yes, Gundam really did bring something new to Mecha. Gundam is very different from Mazinger Z or Getter Robo or Zambot 3, but at the same time, realism is not a binary. The original Gundam is incredibly goofy at times. How hard you like your science fiction is a matter of taste. But you just might find that if you give something out of your comfort zone a chance, that there might be other series and genres that you've never considered that you may greatly enjoy. I have to admit, in the past, I used to very much look down on shoujo series. But after giving Revolutionary Girl Utena a try, that ultimately led me to watching Princess Tutu and The Rose of Versailles, and I greatly enjoyed all of those. I guess where I'm going with all this is that GaoGaiGar is the greatest! GaoGaiGar! 手紙金の腕光り輝くジスと地球の希望を守るため今こそ立ち上がれ人の心の幸せを壊すそんな許せないガガガガガガガオガイガガガガガガガガガオガイガファイナルフュージョン少人だ今だ超人だったいだ空間湾曲ディバイディングドライバー奇跡神秘真実夢誕生無敵のどでかい守護神僕らの勇者を